I don't know why that is, or even I guess you have centaurs. You've got animal like people tops and animal bottoms. I mean, I don't know why. Well, I guess that's just.
In this case, I mean, I guess one of the more traditional views on it is that he's describing creatures that are there to represent the glory of God or what. But my concern is, okay, how did you come up with that? Okay, I understand, that we're not, it's fairly plain on the face. I'm talking about this and this and this, and this is what they look like. But, my question is, do people really believe that these creatures exist like this, or is this a poetic description?
Right.
And what we find happening is people dig through this book, particularly Ezekiel, Daniel, Revelation, etc., in these crazy-sounding passages, and they find things that say what they'd like them to say. They read their own preferences into this.
Well,
now,
I think to some degree, the more abstract, the better.
Yes.
The more it lends itself to interpretation.
I'm sure that somewhere online you can find something that generates text in the same sort of, cryptic biblical style of, let me generate a new revelation, the revelation of, Mogwai.
Yeah, that really upsets me because I think it should either be you take the whole book literally or you take none of it literally. I don't think if you believe some of what's in it, they should not believe the rest, It just makes no sense.
Well, I do think they believe, for example, that Ezekiel had a vision. I mean, I think that most literalist Christians would accept, I don't know that they would accept necessarily that these creatures were real, but they would probably accept that God endowed Ezekiel with a vision.
There are also, and I want to be clear that by and large I agree that if you're going to accept a portion of the book, you should accept it at face value unless there's clear demonstration that somebody's speaking in hyperbole or poetic or whatever. But I don't necessarily agree that one is obligated to take the whole book, certainly not literally, but unless, and this is where Christians in particular find themselves in a problem. Your view is this entire book is Scripture, breathed by God, that is necessarily true. And as soon as you've begun with that presupposition, now all of a sudden everything in here is of equally valuable, equally true. If you don't start with that, you can say something about, oh, well, here in John, they're talking about this happening, and it's completely mundane. After this, Jesus and his disciples went out in the Judean countryside where he spent some time with them and baptized. Wow, okay, I have no problem at all believing something like that occurred. And John was baptizing near Salem because there was plenty of water and because people were constantly coming to be baptized. I got no problem believing that at all. Now, when you start talking about walking on water, all right, now we've entered a different realm.
Right.
And I don't know how, I used to do it, and I don't know how people end up reconciling that.
All right, well, thank you. I just wanted to get your take on that, and I'm sure you guys have more callers, so thanks again.
Okay, thanks. Actually, we don't have more callers.
Lucky. It looks like somebody just came on.
I think we only have 2 lines. I'm going to try something. No, we actually have 3. But oddly enough, only 2 of them seem to have been lighting up. And
I would like to add that you point out something important, which is that in mythologies, there are cues that these are myths. And the cue that this thing is a myth is when you hit a point where it conflicts with reality. And that's when that's when your brain is supposed to click in, and it says, this is a story. This is a story. And what's interesting is that you can hand, for the most part, a Christian anybody else's mythology, and they get that.
Yes.
They'll read it, and they'll say, but that's just, look, that's just wild. That's just made up. Muhammad didn't ride to Mecca on a beast flying through the air. That's, obviously that's a made-up story. And Buddha didn't battle demons under the Bodhi tree. And, they understand when they're reading mythology, as much as anybody else, that when they get to the point where the story starts to talk about some crazy event, that, okay, we're dealing with a myth here. But when it's your own, and it's not specific to Christians. I don't mean to imply that it is.
Right.
It's basically anybody that accepts any mythology literally. Usually they reject other mythologies for reasons that they should reject their own.
Yeah. And I've said a number of times that, you know, if you wanted to really do good research into a particular religion to find the objections, you don't necessarily have to go to a biblical scholar or a Quranic scholar or whatever. All you need to do is go look at what Muslims have to say about Christianity and what Christians have to say about Jews and what Jews have to say about Muslims and what they all have to say about Mormons and what Catholics have to say about Protestants, and et cetera. They've already done all the work for you.
Yeah, they're their own worst critics.
Yeah, the non-theistic individuals don't have any work that really needs to be done other than, you know, collating data.
Yeah, because I can guarantee you just about any doctrine you can find, you will find a counter doctrine that is just as readily believed and supported.
And actually, within Christianity, it's even easier because you don't have to go outside of Christianity. You're talking about thousands of denominations, and there is not a single point of doctrine that is not disputed, where somebody has rejected it, right down to the existence of Jesus as a human, or whether he was half human, half God, or all human, all God, or all human, or all God, or figurative. I mean, every single possible element of that is adhered to by somebody. And rejected by somebody else.
And the fundamentalists will provide you verses for any one of those beliefs you want to.
Oh yeah, you want to have fun sometime?
Any one of those doctrines.
Go on to one of the sites where they prefer the authorized version, the 1611 King James version, and quote something from the NIV, just for kicks. See what happens. It's absolutely a blast. I got Brandon in Fresno. How you doing? Ooh.
Yeah, I'm good. This is Brandon.
We've got like a theremin sound of echo, but go ahead.
Yeah, I can hear an echo over here too, but I wanted to call and talk about a caller that called last week.
Yeah.
He was, trying to say that he was willing to believe that there is a God and that there is not God.
Yeah.
And you guys did a pretty good job of ripping into him, but I think that there's probably a lot of people out there who would say the same thing about their beliefs.
Yeah.
A lot of fence sitters or a lot of people that just haven't analyzed it enough.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, the point that those people need to hear is that believing means that they accept the claim. I think that they get confused thinking that believing is that they don't reject the claim.
Yeah. There's been quite a bit of discussion about this. Russell listened to the show and posted on the blog, and he took issue with my position, at least in part, and I did a defense of it, and that I don't think really affects what you're saying. But my take isn't that somebody can't believe two contradictory things. Of course they can. We know people who do it all the time. My position is that in order for somebody to believe two contradictory things, there needs to be some layer of obfuscation. There needs to be something that hides and disguises the contradiction. For somebody to say, I believe A and I believe B and I believe A and B are contradictory, that is the one and only situation where I'm saying that either that person is crazy, lying, or somehow deceiving themselves.
Yes,
they have engaged in some confusion that obfuscates it for them.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of the caller from last week, when he said, I think the rough quote was that I can see myself as equally theist and atheist. I think that if I'd have pointed out that it would have been okay for him to say, well, actually it wouldn't have because of the way he phrased it, but theist and anti-theist, where you're talking about two alternate propositions and that you do not accept either of them, that would make sense. But in the way he phrased it, he would have been in the position of accepting both of them, which is still a contradiction. So, I mean, he was like fractally wrong in the phrasing, but I think what he actually meant was that he is in this fence-sitting position on the question of does a God exist or does a God not exist. And as Tracy has pointed out numerous times, this phrase that we've heard, which is I neither believe nor disbelieve, makes me, well, it made me pull all my hair out.
Observe.
Because the second you say I neither believe, you're done. You've already said you disbelieve by definition. What you haven't done is address whether or not you believe the opposite, the contrary claim.